to you all. I'm very pleased to be here to share with you some concepts related to institutional and corporate communication. Would like to introduce me and say that I've been working in corporate communication field for more than 20 years. So I developed a technical and strategical knowledge in this field, and afterwards I also lectured it at different universities. Now I'm here to share with you some elements of corporate communication in order to give you some key elements to understand how the corporate communication is structured and how you can use it in your daily professional life as communicators. When it comes to institutional and corporate communication, the main aspect is clarify some concepts that are related to this global concept of corporate communication. Of course, it's paramount to discover what communication is and what corporation is. Of course, in this chat that we are having together, it's impossible to ascertain all the aspects related to these two concepts, but I would like to underline some key elements that can be useful for the scope that we are aim at. Firstly, what is communication? The answer is, of course, complex, but we have to underline that it's a brand new concept. You have to think that it dates back to the second half of the 20th century. After the Second World War, some scholars of different disciplines like mathematics, linguistics, semiotics, cybernetics, psychology, philosophy started to developing a new theory of communication. Of course, there are lots of different interpretations of the communication phenomenon, but we here use a simplified structure just to help you to cope with the daily activities in corporate communication. The model that I'd like to put you forward is this one, related to information, dialogue, and relationship. In this vision, communication is a process of exchange between two subjects, subject A and subject B, which unfolds on three distinct but complementary levels. We have the first level of information. There is a sender, subject A, that says something to the receiver B. This is the most common scheme of communication elaborated by Shannon and Weaver in 1949 and in some way reshaped by Jacobson in 1963. This is the basic level of communication that every one of us had in mind when he thinks to communication, probably. The second level of this process is the dialogue, is the interactive exchange. This is structured with a sender A that says something to the receiver B, and afterwards listen to their feedback. The concept of feedback is the basic discovery of Paul Václavic in 1967 in the famous book Pragmatics of Human Communication in Palo Alto, California, when he lectured these things and within his famous study group. And he started to introduce this concept of feedback that is paramount in order to establish that communication is not only one-way communication, but is two-way communication. Always Paul Václavic in the same book, in the same period, established the third level of this communication model, that is relationship. He underlined that the sender A behaves in some way with the receiver B. And this relationship characterized deeply all the communication phenomena. So communication is, in a most evident way, relationship. And we can have this vision of these three different, distinct levels that are complementary, one within the others. And so this model is the basic model that allows us to explain how the human interpersonal communication works. From the human interpersonal communication to the corporate communication, there is not a great gap, because also companies are open systems, and they are human beings, generally speaking, are open systems. So this, the fact that both are systems allows us to extend this model also to corporate communication. So, to sum up, we can say that the information dialogue relationship scheme is the model that allows us to understand the complex phenomenon of corporate communication as it explained in the past the phenomenon of the human interpersonal communication. Corporate communication. We saw something related to communication. Now we have to focus just a little bit on corporation. It is impossible here, of course, analyze all the aspects of corporation, but there is an element that is paramount and we have to focus on it. This element is the concept of system. If I'm not mistaken, in the 17th century, John Donne says that no man was an island. And we can paraphrase it and say that no company is an island. Companies are not closed to the environment in which they act, but they are embedded in it, and they maintain and develop continuous relationship with this environment. The reason of this is related to the fact that corporation is a system characterized by equifinality. Every single element of the company is aimed at a unique final result, and all the elements contribute to achieve this aim. But this global achievement is not something that is some sort of cocoon that excludes the outside environment, but is, as I've already said, it is embedded in this environment and have to create and develop continuous relationships with this external environment. In this picture, you can see what I was saying. The corporation is a sort of transformation process from some inputs, factors of production, and constraints and conditioning, and through a transformation process, the corporation gives out some goods and services, the outputs, and other conditioning that can condition, in fact, the output phenomenon. But what is paramount here to underline is the fact that corporation is embedded in a market, in a competitive environment, as Michael Porter said. So what is relevant for us here to underline is the fact that corporation is not isolated. It's not a cocoon in the environment, but this environment contributes to shape the corporation in itself. From that point of view, the relationships that the corporation is able to activate with other entities is really important. And this relationship is an exchange of information. And this exchange of information is related to all those who have some interest in the corporation. The name that the classical theory gave to this subject is stakeholders. Stakeholder is a concept that was used for the first time by Robert Edward Freeman in 1984 in a famous book, Strategic Management Stakeholder Approach. He defined the stakeholder as any group or individual who can affect or is affected, there is an active and passive role, by the achievement of the organization's objectives. At the end of the day, stakeholders are the subject with whom the company must have a relationship and carry out its economic activity. They are all the people, all the group of people that have a sort of relationship with the corporation, and every corporation have to manage properly this kind of relationships. There are different types of stakeholders. The first one is named primary stakeholders. They are the groups without whose continuous participation the company could not survive. They are fundamental, they are paramount. And they are, we can make some examples like shareholders, investors, employees, customers, suppliers, local communities, and the state. There's 6 different groups of stakeholders are paramount for the company itself. Think what can happen if employees stop to work for a corporation, or stakeholders and investors retire their own capital. The company cannot survive. There are also secondary stakeholders, the groups who influence or are influenced by the company, but who are not engaged in transactions with it and are not essential for its survival. They are paramount, but not essential. They are opinion groups, the media, political groups, trade associations, consumer associations, and all the groups that can mobilize public opinion. What is crucial to underline here, and that is that the corporate communication is the activity of creating and establishing constructive and positive relationships with all these stakeholders. So, to sum up, we can say that corporate communication is mainly stakeholder engagement. It's the activity of establish and manage a relationship with stakeholders. Generally speaking, there are 4 sectors in corporate communication. In this picture, you can see how every corporation has some corporate strategies that are related to the competitive scenario within which the company operates. We have marketing strategies, organizational strategies, and financial strategies. There are also very important reputational strategies. As for marketing strategies, we have a correspondent type of corporate communication. It is commercial communication. This kind of communication is referred to customers, acquired and potential ones. Then we have also internal communication, referred to organizational strategies, and refer towards employees and collaborators. The most specific and technical type of financial communication is referred to financial strategies and investors, potential and acquired ones. Last but not least, there is an institutional communication. That is the most interesting part of communication and that we are focusing on today together. It's referred to reputational strategies, and it is aimed and directed at public opinion in general through the mediation of the mass media. As the word mass media indicates, medium is a mediator, is something through which communication message is conveyed. And so we have a passage information from the company to the public opinion through the mediation of the mass media. All these four activity and sectors of communication have to be explained in more detail. As for institutional communication, we have already said that it's referred to all stakeholders, and it is aimed to get general social consensus. This is represented by visibility in the short term and reputation in the long run. Of course, it has to be underlined that institutional communication is placed at a higher level than the other three, and it plays a role as a link between all the other three sectors of communication. We are speaking about corporate identity. All the intangible elements that build the corporate identity, vision, mission, and values. All these intangible elements that characterize the sort of DNA of the corporation that have to be conveyed to the external stakeholders. This is referred, as I was saying, to reputation. What is reputation? Corporate reputation is the set of perceptions and opinions that the main stakeholders of an organization have conjured up on the basis of its characteristics and behavior over time. These perceptions are built up through three different passages. Direct contact with the corporation, the communication activity of the organization itself, and the complex relationship network in which the stakeholders take part in. Through these perceptions, the stakeholders generate in their minds a complex perception of what the corporation is. And this is very strategic for a corporation, because if you think that when it comes to image, visibility, they are external and superficial aspects. They can be created, quote unquote, by communication processes, also in a short-term perspective. This is the typical phenomenon of propaganda or spin doctoring campaigns. These are all the phenomena related to, for instance, politics, in which in political campaigns you take an unknown person and you can give him or her a sort of image that can, with the aim of being recognized from a larger public. But this is not referred to reputation. In fact, lots of cases of politicians after the election can have lots of problems if their own reputation is not very well funded. Reputation on the other hand, is based on consistent, deep and consolidated aspects, with particular reference to the behaviors adopted by the company in the long run. Reputation is characterized by a long-term perspective, and then it's impossible to create a reputation through the communication. Reputation is created by the behavior of a corporation in the long run. And what is the role of communication in all this process? Communication can manage, can improve a reputation, and also defend it when it can be attacked during a reputation crisis. This is the role of communication, but not create from scratch a reputation. This is important because some colleagues sometimes sell themselves as creator of reputation, but this is impossible if you understand what reputation is. There are also the other three corporate communication sectors. We have commercial or product communication, referred to existing and potential customers. Is explained in product recognition, the old phenomena related to the brand awareness, the fact that when you enter a supermarket, you recognize a product that you have in some way known before through different communication strategies. But this is the short-term object, and then customer loyalty, the allegiance of customers in the long term related to a product or to a brand. Is the most developed activity of communication in a corporation, and is the most famous way of communicate as the advertising, and also sales promotions and sponsorship. But the most common and known way of communication, of communicate in this way, is advertising. As for internal communication, we have to focus on the kind of communication related to employees and collaborators. It's something that in a corporation you do in strict relationship with HR and the human resources management activity. The main objective of this communication in the short term is engagement and sharing of activities, and a sense of belonging in the long run. It is true that sometimes this kind of sector of corporate communication is named as the Cinderella of the communication, because it's sometimes neglected. And this is a real pity, because this kind of communication is strategical and very helpful to manage a corporation and an institution. Last but not least, economic and or financial communication is aimed at get the social consensus of the business community. Is a kind of communication very specialized and very technical, referred to eminently to listed companies, so I don't want to go too much in depth for us meeting. All these four communication sectors, corporate communication sectors, have not to be perceived as cocoons and differentiated words, but something perfectly related one each other. This is the communication system of a company. Every single aspect of communication is profoundly linked to the others, and every element have to be conceived as a part of a whole. So we have corporate functions that have to be that have to work together, and the responsible of the communication have to ensure a coordination between the different types of communication. From an organizational point of view, the global activity of corporate communication is in the hands of the top management. It's the top management, board of directors, CEO, chairman, that are in charge of corporate communication at its highest level. This means that the strategy of corporate communication have to be shared with the highest level of the corporation, the dominant coalition, as we sometimes say, and they have to narrow down the most important elements of the strategy. From that moment on, is the responsible of the communication that have the role of implement this strategy and execute this strategy in the operational steps. So we have different specialized corporate communication functions like media relations, web and social media management, public affairs, advertising, internal communication, investor relations, and so forth. And all these activities, these operational and practical activities, have to maintain, to have continuous relationship with the other corporate functions, such as marketing, human resources management, administration and control, and so on. Every single communication professional has some roles in its own profession. The most important is the operational role. He or she have to prepare the means of communication, communication tools, communication actions. And if this person is younger, probably this activity is the most important also in terms of time in its own daily activity. Whereas if it is a senior professional, this represents just a part of his or her own work. There is, in fact, another aspect, the managerial activity, the capacity for coordinating different resources, economic resources, different people, and make them work together. Another important role for the professional is the educational one. Every communicator have to help all the members of the organization to become communicatively competent, not just in things like public speaking or become a good spokesperson if it's, for instance, the CEO or the chairman, but also creating positive relationship with all the colleagues within a corporation in order to get different inputs of communication that can be that can normally are scattered in the different directions and the different departments of the corporation. Last but not least, the reflective role. Every communicator must analyze changing standards, values, and standpoints in society and discuss this with members of the organization. It's a strategic role. You have to become capable for eliciting some organizational standards, values, and views, and help your dominant coalition to write down a strategy of corporate communication. Nowadays, we are witnessing to different trends in corporate communication. The first one is a skill specialization. No one today can improvise this activity. The advent of the web 2.0, 3.0 are changing completely the landscape of the communication. And then every single professional have to be highly skilled in its own work. But bear in mind the importance of connect all these skills in an integrated model. So the integration of sectors and functions is paramount. A unique coordination, frequent use of teamwork, and continuous exchange of information are the basis of this achievement. For this reason, the role of the corporate communication is very similar to a director of an orchestra. The director is not the first violin, is not the best player of the piano, of the drums, of the other instruments, but you have to know them perfectly and try to make play all the participants of an orchestra, of the members of an orchestra, to follow perfectly the score that they are playing. So this role of orchestrating, this communication orchestration, is extremely important to make play a unique melody to all the company communication activities. If it is true that planning is paramount in this field, it can't be denied that we don't have here the time to go extremely in depth in analyzing the different steps of a structured planning for corporate communication. But if you can say this picture, you have the four main phases of strategic planning. We can start from a listening phase, formative research, through which you can analyze the global situation, you can analyze the organization and the industry, and then go in depth to the analysis of the different publics of the corporation. Afterwards, there is a second phase in which you try to elaborate the strategy. You have to establish goals and objectives, formulate action and response strategies, develop messages, and try to single out the tools and the communication actions that are required by this strategy. From this moment on, the planning and strategic activity is completed, and you have to implement this strategy. You have to execute this strategy, producing the tools and achieving the communication actions. After this phase, you have to evaluate your own job and try to assess from a quantitative and qualitative point of view your strategic plan. Comparing the outcomes with the original objectives, you can establish if you achieved or not your own initial goals. Of course, this last listening activity is the first step for a new way of the planning of your communication activity. Last but not least, I'd like to share with you the most known model, and it's a brand new one because it was released at the beginning of 2021, the Global PR and Communication model of the Global Alliance. The Global Alliance is the association of the public relation association in the world They started to create a group, a work group of more than 1,000 of people, professionals, managers, university professors, and different researchers. All these people elaborate and participate in the elaboration of this model that establish what is really paramount in the communication activity. As you can see, there are 5 building blocks, 5 pillars of the communication activity, and they are not immediately communicative. They are not what one can think to communication. The most important building block is corporate purpose. We have already seen it. Vision, mission, values of a corporation. The intangible DNA of a corporation. This is the main focus of the corporate communication. Then we have brand and culture, the intangible elements related to the brand of the corporate brand and product brands, and the corporate culture, the internal elements that in some way mark the people who are in a corporation. Then we have reputation and reputational risks. That is paramount, and we have already discussed it before. And only at the first place we find the communication activity, the proper communication activity, actions and tools of our communication. There is another important pillar, and is related to assessment, to the evaluation of the communication, as we have already dealt with before. These 4 pillars allow us to reach the 4 business outcomes that are the most important in the communication activity. These are differentiation, the fact that my company, my corporation is peculiar, it's different from all the others. The engagement, the capacity for involve stakeholders in a positive relationship and dialogue. The authentic advocacy, the advocacy of the issues that are paramount for the corporation in itself. And last but not least, trust and social legitimacy. All these elements are the good ingredients for conveying good communication fluxes to all your stakeholders.